I will always be a warrior. You can't stop me, you can't stop me now. Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't lock me, you can't lock me down. I will not lay down my arms, ready to be covered in scars, 'cause I will always be a warrior. Late nights, get lost, hard work, the cost, can't quit, can't stop, this world all cut off. Don't have time to waste, not now. Need to find a way to get out, 'cause I'm gone in deep. Get lost in the weeds. You know it's all about the conquest. What's next? You gotta put the work in like you're obsessed. Think about what you want, what's your future? What kind of person would it take to seduce her? So what's next? Be obsessed with winning and your success. Make progress, this life is never promised. So feel blessed, live life, don't be too cautious. Trust the process.
Over the last year and a half, my faith has been rocked in a more real way than I would have ever expected. I never thought this would happen to me. I really never did. I heard other people talking about, man, my faith has been so hard, or I've had so many doubts, or I've da-da-da-da-da. And I just felt like, that's not me. You know, throughout my life, and especially my teen years, everyone would talk about, I have these doubts, I have these questions, and especially creating content, I wanted to be like, hey, no, you know, ask God those questions, or it's okay to have doubts, and da-da-da-da-da, and like be affirming to those folks that were feeling those things. But for me, I just didn't experience that. Sure, I had my anxieties about whether God was going to provide in one area or another, but in terms of the overall scope of God's story, I knew that was true. I knew that, you know, Jesus really did come and really did die on the cross and really did die for my sins, and I knew that God created us, and all those things just seemed really just to make sense to me. While other people had more struggles and questions, da-da-da-da-da, I just felt like, makes sense. Until about over the last year and a half. I want to tell you why and where I am now. Okay, so I don't want you to be concerned, but I want you to listen. And hopefully this will help you engage with your faith in a more authentic way. Okay, over the last year, we have found out that my mom was diagnosed with cancer again. For some of you that have been following the channel a while or know, you know, more about my life personally, my mom...
This is why you should not have a misunderstanding of God. You should not have a misunderstanding about what healing is in a spiritual sense. You should not have a misunderstanding about what the Bible is. This is why those misbeliefs are dangerous when apologists lie to you and put that little tapeworm in your ear.
Had cancer about 5 years ago, and it was stage 4. It was very serious. God healed her from that, but it has either returned or come back in some different fashion, and it's even more serious this time. And so, well, you know, people have been asking updates because this isn't the first time that I've spoken of this. She's doing well. She's getting treatments necessary, and you know, she personally and spiritually and emotionally is doing really, really well. So thank you for all your prayers for her, and continue to pray for her healing in that area as she undergoes treatments and all sorts of things like that. But that has been really, really challenging, among a number of other things that have shaken me emotionally, personally, relationally, have hit me in my core, really. Okay. And I'm just going to be vague about that because they are personal, right? But I want you to know that they were extremely real. Okay. And they caused me to, you know, need to go to therapy, honestly. Like that's the truth of it. And I don't think you should just go to therapy when you're really in the pit. But I do think if you're not already going to therapy and you're in the pit, then, you know, you should start going. And so that's where I was getting angry at God. I told my wife this, that I was angry at God, and I'm sure it was scary for her. But for me, I just had to be honest and say, you know what, I think I need to deal with some things, because I had some expectations of what I thought God was going to deliver me and was what I was entitled to. And I haven't been given those things. And in fact, God has shortchanged me in some ways. That's how I felt. And so then I looked at God and I just said, God, like, are you there? And if you are, how can you be good? And how can you be loving? And how can you really be a good father? I don't feel your love. I don't feel your presence. I feel like I'm at the end of my rope, actually, for real. And I would call this next season of life exploring doubt. So in the midst of this kind of war within, right? Because I knew there was frustration, there was anger towards God and just life in general. In the midst of exploring doubt, I began to watch different videos of people that were deconstructing, the people that were questioning their faith to the degree where they were taking off core fundamentals of the faith. This was
I'm sure he's going to pull it around toward the end of the video because he has monetization and an audience and all that bullshit to worry about. But this is legitimately why I tell people not to lie about what the Bible says and what the Bible is and what God is and how God works. God's not a genie. God's not there to make you feel good. He's not your best friend. He's not. He's not your buddy. He's not there to see you through the hard times and the good times and the bad times. God is the creator of all things. Everything that exists, including AIDS and cancer, he created. Okay? You're not special, not even better or greater than a single cell organism. God created that too. What makes you special is that God, according to the narrative, created man to rule, to care, to love the earth. Your job is to care about what happens to the animals and creatures that belong to God. You are there to care for this earth and for this planet. That's your whole purpose. God doesn't want sacrifice. He wants a contrite and humbled heart, and he wants you, his servant, to do his will. Does that mean that God won't help you? No, of course. Ask and you shall receive. But sometimes the answer is no. God plays favorites, and there's a chance that you're not one of his. It's not supposed to be fair. You have a bad, uneducated, pathetic, childish way of understanding God. And all of us have to start off that way. We all have to think of God as the genie at one point. That's just where our faith begins, but your faith should not stay there. Because the moment real suffering comes, if you still think of God as a wish granter, as a he's going to make everyone else's life terrible, but he's going to make my life great, you're in for a rude awakening when life hits you hard. Job was God's favorite, and he let Satan do what he will. You have an immature, naive understanding of God. God will let you die of cancer and AIDS. God will let you get hit by a car. I'm sorry, dude. God's not there to be your personal wish maker. He's not a fictional superhero. He can be your sword and your buckler and your shield if you have true abiding faith in him and you obey him. But he can also be your judge. Job did nothing wrong, but he suffered. David did plenty wrong, but he was rewarded. Your understanding of your faith needs to grow if you're going to stay in your faith. You have to throw away once saved, only saved, if that's something you believe, because that ain't true. You need to throw away your childish ideas. And as Paul says, when I was a child, I thought as a child. Now that I'm a man, I think as a man. You have to grow up.
It wasn't unusual for me. I've debunked people that were deconstructing their faith, people that have accusations against Christianity. I know all the apologetics connected with it, but it wasn't about apologetics for me. It was much more philosophical than that. It was about, well, if God is good, then why is this happening? And the common answers that I would get, and honestly that I would give, didn't feel satisfying. They didn't feel satisfying. Why? Because they didn't squelch the pain. They didn't stop the pain. They didn't stop the pain. I'm at rock bottom.
Life is pain. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. A wise man once said that. Look up the quote.
Struggling. I'm not shooting any videos right now. I'm reading a few books. I'm watching videos about people deconstructing and people just really, honestly, turning away from their faith because it feels good. Because it feels like, yeah, I relate to.
No, it feels easy because you're angry and because your understanding of faith was based on lies. You listened to apologists and you listened to preachers who wanted your money. That's why your faith is failing now, because they didn't prepare you for real life. The world that you live in, the world where there's murder and death and suffering, God created that world. Your understanding of God needs to grow or your faith will die.
This
I'm
makes
doing
sense to me.
something, by the way. Dude, come on.
But at the same time, if I was honest with myself, I knew, Isaac, who are you kidding? You know God is real. You know that Christianity is true. You know that God's been really patient with you right now, even though you're angry at him. And you know that you should just start from the beginning. So that's what I did. I started with Christianity 101. Some of what turned me off in this stage was continually hearing like theological debates that really got in the weeds, that really divided Christians, that really like were like, we got to talk about every little minute theological issue and we got to make this the hugest deal ever. And at that point I was like, well, is any of this true? Like, are you guys just totally wasting your time? So I got back to Christianity 101. What is the gospel? What was I made for? What is this whole thing about? Okay. And sometimes you need to do that. Honestly, I think you do need to do that when you hit trial.
You're made to care for the things that God created. You are his slave. We are on his land. We are his servants. We are here to do his will. That's it. It's not about worship, man. It's really not. God wants a contrite heart. Yes, it is good to talk to your Father. It is good to talk to God. But you shouldn't confuse him with a human father, because that's not what he is.
When you are shaken, you go back to your foundation. What am I standing on? One important realization that I had throughout this, and this is a biblical truth, is that our suffering is not apart from God. That these trials that I'm experiencing are not apart from God, but rather are designed there to mold me, to develop me in perseverance, that I would rely more heavily on God, there to mold me and to shape me. While I was in the midst of this season, I came across this video that was about earthquake testing for buildings, how they can test a building that it will withstand a big earthquake. And this is really interesting engineering. I'm not super familiar with the ins and outs of this, but the video actually, God used the video to teach me something very important about my own spiritual walk. The first and most obvious thing is that it really mattered what I was building my life upon, what foundation I had. What I realized was the foundation that I was operating on, at least in part, was faulty. And it was about the good Christian mindset. I'm going to be a good guy.
Let's hear that again. That was so stupid. I've never heard
our
something so
suffering
naive.
is not apart from God. That these trials that I'm experiencing are not apart from God, but rather are designed there. And you go through little Christianity 101. Some of what turned me off in this stage was continually hearing like theological debates that really got in the weeds, that really divided Christians, that really like were like, we got to talk about every little minute theological issue and we got to make this the hugest deal ever. And at that point I was like, well, is any of this true? Like, are you guys just totally wasting your time? So I got back to Christianity 101. What is the gospel? What was I made for? What is this whole thing about? Okay. And sometimes you need to do that. Honestly, I think you do need to do that when you hit trial, when you are shaken, you go back to your foundation. What am I standing on? One important realization that I had throughout this, and this is a biblical truth, is that
Biblically speaking,
our suffering is not apart from God. That these trials that I'm
see right here, this part, I was like, okay, he's going somewhere good. Maybe he learned something.
experiencing are not apart from God, but rather are designed there to mold me, to develop me.
This is the dumbest shit I've heard, and I hear it all the time from so many pastors. Stop saying this to people. Oh, this is a lesson to help you become a better person. No, that's not how this works. If you believe in free will compounds. There are decisions that happen years ago that have nothing to do with you, that are the reason your mother has cancer. Someone decided to put a light post up. Someone put bad wiring. Someone decided to use copper. A human decision caused suffering to other people. Do you understand? God gave us free will, and free will compounds. Someone put mercury in some kind of food, maybe as an ingredient, and that diluted and was eaten. Maybe someone used unclean pans. Maybe, depending on what kind of cancer it is, it can be different causes. HPV, for instance, can be a cause of cancer. There are a lot of types of causes for cancer that don't have to have a spiritual meaning. That doesn't mean it can't. And it doesn't mean you can't turn it into a spiritual thing. That doesn't mean that you can't give the suffering up to God and make it a religious experience. You can. But you do not need to give divine providence to human decisions. Somebody could have put up electrical wiring or a grid or chemicals where your mother was, and she could have gotten cancer that way. She could have made bad choices that her health was substantive and was then exposed to cancer-causing carcinogens. I've had over 100 members of my family die. Over 100. Most from diabetes, some from cancer. Not everything has a cause or a reason, but you can give it meaning. You can give it up to God. You can give that suffering up to God. You can help them through that process so they can get closer to God and they can die with peace and dignity. You can do those things. That's part of what religion is there for. It's not the main thing, but that's part of why it's there. But it's not molding you to become a better person, because those same things, those same trials can turn you into a terrible person. Now, you can view it as a trial, and that's perfectly legit. But you have to stop telling people that the reason why something terrible happened to you is because God's trying to make you into a better person. Because you have no idea what God's plans are or are not.
Perseverance, that I would rely more heavily on God there to mold me and to shape me. While I was in the midst of the season, I came across this video that was about earthquake testing for buildings, how they can test a building that will withstand a big earthquake. And this is really interesting engineering. I'm not super familiar with the ins and outs of this, but the video actually, God used the video to teach me something very important about my own spiritual walk. The first and most obvious thing is that it really mattered what I was building my life upon, what foundation I had. What I realized was the foundation that I was operating on, at least in part, was
I'm not against God sending you a message, but you can't just open the Bible, pick a verse, and think that's the verse that God wants you to read. Don't turn biblical reading into witchcraft or necromancy or some kind of other evil divination. It's not how it works. First off, that's against Christian principles to even think that way, let alone to try to do that. So you're getting a message from a television or you're getting a message from a song, the very first thing you need to do is check your sanity and see if you're about to have a mental break. Then, after we assume your sanity is fine, ask yourself, am I being inspired by this based on previous knowledge? Or is this something that I would not understand on my own? There are many levels to go to before you're going to jump straight to an angel. A messenger of God is giving me a message. It's not impossible that it's a message from God, but you have to first reason what it is that you are thinking subconsciously. What are you connecting to? Because maybe there is a message from God, but maybe it's much deeper than the superficial bullshit that you're spreading right now.
Was faulty. And it was about the good Christian mindset. The good Christian mindset. I'm going to be a good guy. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to be responsible. And
thinking that you're good, or that you're going to be the good guy, or that you're going to be the hero is the type of pride that leads to a fall, and the type of pride the Bible itself warns against. I'm pretty sure Judas thought he was being the good guy, turning in Jesus. This is faulty thinking. You're using faulty logic. Again, I'm not saying it couldn't be a message from God. It could. But from what you're saying and based on the situation that you were in, it might not have been. Or it might have been a much deeper message. And you might have missed the message because you're busy trying to use this kind of divination, charismatic thing that might not be real. It could be a momentary episode of psychosis because of the amount of tension and stress and suffering you were going through. I would recommend a therapist. Maybe this was God's way of saying you should go see a therapist.
Yes, Jesus died for my sins. Yes, I'm forgiven by him. But still, it's about me being a good, responsible Christian man, and God will bless me because of that, right? Isn't that the message of Proverbs? Isn't that what it's about? But what we often do is we take Proverbs, but we don't think about Ecclesiastes, right? Those things go in pair. It's that, hey, sometimes you're working and you're doing the right thing, but it still doesn't turn out for you. Why? Why is this? Like, are we guaranteed that we're going to have this amazing life just because we do things the right way? What happens when we experience trials? I had this mindset that as long as I was a good guy, as long as I was a Christian.
There is no right way. There is only choosing Jesus and living the life the best way that you can. Jesus loves you, and God loves you, and the Holy Spirit embraces you, whether you're the greatest person of all time or the worst. You could be the greatest sinner, and God will still come to you if you're one of the elect. It has nothing to do with being a good or bad person. That is childish thinking. Stop thinking like a child.
As long as I was responsible, then everything would be great. What happens when it's not? You have two choices in that situation. You become bitter because your foundation isn't all that it's cracked up to be, and you suppress and you suppress and you suppress, and you wait until an earthquake hits that's actually going to knock your whole building down. Or you just pray that never happens. And sometimes that never happens for people. They never hit an earthquake that really shakes them enough for them to realize that their foundation is faulty. Maybe they do live that good guy Christian life, right? And everything just goes well for them, and they have a nice family, and sure, there's some challenges here and there, but it never causes them to really evaluate what they're standing on. So in a lot of ways, I see this as a blessing. Here's the deal. What I found out, and this is kind of crazy, and maybe some of you guys that have developed buildings and know about foundations, this is obvious to you, but it was interesting to me. So one of the biggest things was that concrete, if you build a foundation and a building with concrete, right? Something that's really sturdy, something that's really hard, that like one of the hardest things, right? And an earthquake comes. What happens? It cracks.
You're going to have to get used to.
I don't mean to come out so strong on this guy, but as someone who's gone through terrible suffering in my life, this kind of shit would send me through the roof and would have made me lose my faith. In fact, I did leave the church for over 15 years.
Very resilient to that kind of movement. So what happens? So what do? Timber, like wood, it's flexible, it's pliable, it's soft in some context, right? So it's like you build that and it can withstand the movement when the earthquake comes. You would think, I need to build this with the hardest thing, the impermeable substance. But actually, you want something flexible. You want something malleable. You want something that can withstand the blow, right, of the earthquake. We think we can manufacture this foundation and this life that's impermeable, right? That nothing can hit it, that we're going to block out everything that's bad, keep a smile on our face. No, we're doing great. No, everything is wonderful. No, I serve at church. No, I have a great family life. No, my marriage is great. We think we can do that. What happens when the earthquake comes? Well, it crumbles down. It crumbles down. So what do we need? We need a soft and humble heart. A soft and humble heart. I look at the scriptures, and I was looking at the scriptures, I was thinking about this. Just think about how Jesus talks about those who will be blessed. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who hunger. These are all people that are in need. This isn't somebody that's totally self-sufficient. No, this isn't somebody that's rock solid. This is somebody that needs.
This is terrible, terrible, terrible advice. Okay, let's work backward a little bit here. The poorest person you know, the person who's completely homeless and starving, God loves them and God is with them. Someone who's going through divorce, someone who's stolen something, someone who's committed horrible, horrible crimes, God loves them. God wants them to turn away from their sins and come to Him. The worst person you can think of, God loves them. It's not about being rich or successful. It's not about having good health. None of those things build the kingdom of God. None of those things are requirements for the kingdom of heaven. That is the prosperity gospel, and that is evil.
Needs. This is somebody that's soft. This is somebody that requires something from somebody else, right? In order for their cup to be filled, in order to be satisfied, in order for them to be comforted. Like, they need God. They recognize that. It's not about developing this perfect concrete structure that can't be defeated. It's about being soft and moldable and malleable to the movement of God in our life. God does things in our life to soften us, soften our hearts.
No. We make our own decisions. 100% everything that you do is on you. Good, bad, in the middle. Now, God can do miracles. God can help you. God can guide you. But He's giving you the free will to choose Him or not choose Him. Anything else doesn't matter. It can be deterministic, or it can be completely libertarian free will outside of that choice. But the choice that matters is whether or not you choose God or not. Your success or failure in life doesn't matter in the next world. It's not about being the richest. It's not about being the poorest.
To receive His love. Have you ever come across somebody that has such a hard heart? You can just tell they have a hard heart, and they have such a hard time receiving love. They just won't, and they won't require it. They don't need it from you. I don't need it. I don't need you to love me. I don't care. Why? Because they've hardened their heart so much.
Hardening of the heart has nothing to do with your interactions with your fellow man. Having a kind heart and listening, doing God's will, and listening to God and obeying Him requires you to care for others. Yes. But there's nothing about being nice. There's nothing about being kind. There's nothing about being friendly. Love is not friendly or nice or easy. Don't be a naive child.
Impermeable. They can't get to it. Love can't get in there. So what does God do? He does things in our life to soften our heart to receive His love. In this season, I was seeing God much more as a perpetrator than...
I don't mean this in a crass way, dude, but what's going to happen when your mom dies? So you're going to lose your faith because God didn't save her? What's going to happen when you develop a disease and God doesn't cure it? He did not cure Paul's thorn in his side. Paul prayed 3 times truly, and God said no to him. What are you going to do if you're still thinking this way when God says no to you? What are you going to do?
As my provider, I was seeing Him as the enemy rather than my friend. Something clicked in my brain that realized that I kept on fighting. When I was fighting with God, that wasn't doing anything. I'm fighting against the only one who can really give me the comfort and compassion that my...
Israel wrestled with God. The whole idea behind Israel and Judaism is that they are God's chosen people. They are them. They are they who wrestle with God. That's part of why He loves them.
my heart needs and the love that my heart longs for. These insecurities and these pains and these wounds of my heart were drawing me away from God, were causing me to be bitter at God. God, why did you let this happen? Meanwhile, what God was wanting to do within me was say, Isaac, I've opened you up.
No. Here, let me fix this for you. All these terrible things were happening to you. God was there for you, even as you were going through the suffering. And through His Son, Jesus, He went through that suffering too. So He knows. And He still loves you. And He still forgives you. And He'll still be there for you no matter what happens. As long as you don't lose your faith, He will be there for you. Your ways are not His ways, and you cannot understand why He does what He does or why He allows what He allows. But what you can do is submit and serve humbly and ask every day for either the acceptance of what you're going through or for Him to help you get through it. And He may answer yes. but you cannot predict what he will answer. And if you can get really good at your mysticism, you can even start thanking him for the horrible stuff. And you can learn to see that as a sacrifice that you give up to God. Now, I'm not asking you to be a mystic, but I am asking you to be Christian and not an apologist, not an American evangelical. Get away from the apologetics. Come back to Christ.
I've made you soft. I've broken down your old foundation so you can build one that's based on me, that is soft, that is malleable, that is full of love and compassion and connection and security in me and not your own abilities. One of the hardest things for me was to realize that the anger and the pain and all that I was directing towards God was actually just a mask for the lack of love that I was feeling like I was receiving in my own heart. I was feeling so insecure and so scared. I funneled that into anger. Meanwhile, Jesus wanted to come alongside me and sit next to me and say, Isaac, you don't need to be angry. Let's just cry. Let's just weep. There's a time to mourn. And honestly, that's what it took. It took continually every day reminding myself of God's love for me, his compassion for me, his deep care for me, that even in the pain that I experience, that God is with me and he loves me. And that might sound simplistic to you guys, but honestly, that is the difference. It wasn't about some apologetic argument that got me to be like, oh yeah, actually Jesus did rise from the dead, or actually no, God is real. No, it was about letting go of the anger that I had towards God and receiving his love, and God softening me up to receive his love. I hope this video was helpful for you. I hope you were encouraged by it. If you were...
Well, I'm very comfortable and enjoy the last, I'm going to say 1 minute to either the last 30 seconds or the last minute max. There's about 10 minutes in here that is not good.
I'd encourage you to give this video a like and subscribe.
And as someone who has gone through suffering, I would not recommend someone who is suffering go to this video for advice or help.
If you want to support what we do on this channel, equipping people to follow Jesus daily, I'd encourage you to sign up on...
You want to give good advice to someone who's suffering? Things are bad right now and they're going to get worse. But if you keep your head, you'll make it through this. That's good advice. You could make it through it. Every apostle, except for one, was a martyr. Remember that. And God loved all of them.
Patreon today, it would be a huge blessing. And until next time, God bless.
I had this question. No music. All right, hold on. Let's go. Hold on. Let me fix this. Give me a second. Oh, it's a Latter-day Saints commercial. Oh, now I kind of wish I had kept it on. Okay. Cancel. Come over here. Doop 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 doop. Let's see. Here we go. My videos. Honest truth, that kind of made me upset. Don't give people who are suffering that kind of advice. That was not cool. People who are suffering, for the most part, do not want sympathy or pity. They just don't. They want compassion, yeah, but nothing beyond that. Helping someone to stand on their own is always better than standing up for someone. It's just better when they can stand up on their own. They feel better about it. Everyone else feels better about it. Don't make someone a victim, not even yourself.
sexualization if it is actually permissible. The anti-sexualization stance, as I'll call it, this time around started off with the idea, quote, nun characters don't have to be scantily clad to be doing something cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Lupin. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, I want to discuss nuns. Is it okay to objectify them? Now, you might be wondering where all of this is coming from, and
didn't have the
like
video
so
playing.
many of our recent topics, this is courtesy of
There you go.
Twitter.com. It
Let's do
truly
the
is
intro
the
again for
curse
the
that
third
keeps
time.
on giving. You might assume this came up because someone...
There you go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Lupin. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another...
Do people still say on fleek? Because I want to say her makeup is on fleek. I'm old. Don't worry about it.
video for you all. Today, I want to discuss nuns. Is it okay to objectify them? Now, you might be wondering where all of this is coming from, and like so many of our recent topics, this
I honestly feel, and maybe it's because I'm Catholic, that people need to stop objectifying nuns. I think it's kind of creepy at this point.
is courtesy of Twitter.com. It truly is the curse that keeps on giving. You might assume this came up because someone asked about religious roleplay on kinky Twitter, or maybe some inappropriate AI art went viral, but no, that actually wasn't it at all. Instead, what happened is a user tweeted a drawing of a nun with the caption, quote, "Don't care how much religious trauma you got, stop sexualizing nuns, parentheses, I'm serious," which, naturally, a lot of people had opinions about. After all, anytime you tell someone they have...
Just to be clear, a nun is legitimately, literally pulling themselves out of the sexual pool. They're choosing a life of chastity. So when you're sexualizing them, you're literally doing something against their will. I'm just being blunt, like not playing around.
to stop doing something online, they will probably fight you about it. And I guess that means I'm also fighting about this, because as a kinky person, getting to objectify nuns or not is like kind of part of a lot of people's wheelhouses. Now, I have to admit, as someone who was raised Catholic, I don't really...
Before she goes there, I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about people who are costuming and LARPing as a nun. I don't care what your outfit is. Clothes are just clothes. What I'm talking about when I say you shouldn't objectify a nun, I mean someone who has taken a vow of chastity or become a religious, whether they're lay or... well, I guess nuns can only be lay. Oh, I think there's a sacrament. I think you could be a sacramental virgin. Because there is an office. There's an office of virgins. Maybe. Anyway, not the point. So whether you're clergy or whether you're lay, I think if you've taken a vow of chastity and you've taken yourself out of the sexual selection process because you don't want to be sexualized, I think sexualizing someone in that position is a violation of their free will and of their personal desires. If you want a terrible, not accurate analogy, it's like taking someone who's ace and trying to put them into either straight, homosexual, or bisexual, or even pansexual into one of those boxes and treating them like such. If they wouldn't be comfortable being sexualized in that way. Think about the same way, but now in a religious sense, that they're concerned about their eternal soul and they want to be chaste and virginal for heaven. They don't want to be part of the human sexual pool.
really care too much about how other people portray nuns or if they get off to them or not. I realize that most modern depictions of typical hot nuns and their corresponding Halloween costumes are not actually that accurate. They bear about as much resemblance to real nuns as modern French-made roleplay outfits do to the 19th century uniforms they're based on. It's all pretty abstracted at this point, and basically they exist as separate things in my brain. There's actual nuns as people, and then nuns as a concept in an erotic context. But it did get me thinking, well, why are
There was a character I was fond of, not in a sexual way, thank goodness for me, which was the warrior nun. She now has a TV show, and I haven't watched it yet because I want a character in there that I know can't be in there. So Everett Hartsoe created a character called Razor, also Lethal Strike, but who cares about Lethal Strike? I want Razor in there, and I also want there's a character called Angel or Dark Angel with a Q. Who is a badass angel who has superpowers. Anyway, Razor started off as like a really street level character, and then after her second or third death became like a semi-angelic creature, and then there was like a dark version of her that was a demon. Very complicated. I want Razor to make an appearance in the Warrior Nun TV show that's on Netflix. And I know she's not going to because I don't think Everett Hartsoe signed off on anything. Unless Warrior Nun is a creation of Everett Hartsoe, but I don't believe it is. Anyway, I liked that character in the comic books. I do want to watch that TV show. But the character has almost no bearing to a real nun, so it kind of doesn't matter. And I think that's kind of where Evie Lupin is trying to make the separation. But I think the problem is that people's public perception of what nuns are has been informed more by the fiction than by the actual nuns that exist. Does that make any sense?
so many people so
BS.
intrigued by outfits like this? Could it actually be wrong to sexualize nuns? And what about other common roles like teachers or priests or maids? Who gets to decide if doing that is wrong or right? And who gets to participate in
The church. And the Bible. And God. There we go. Done. Argument settled. Next case.
that sexualization if it is actually permissible? The anti-sexualization stance, as I'll call it, this time around started off with the idea, quote, nun characters don't have to be scantily clad to...
Let's talk about this for a little bit. So I haven't finished. I've read The Monk, and I've read and I have finished reading two of the Marquis de Sade's three great novels. Sister Act informed B.S. Lewis and his opinions on nuns. What was I going to say? So the Marquis de Sade really takes nuns and monks to a totally depraved level. And there are monks and nuns and priests in real life who are depraved. So that kind of satirization and mocking is there for a reason, both political and for titillation. There's another word I want to use, but I can't think of it right now. And while I get that, I think sexualization of real nuns and real priests, I think, is objectifying and not good. It's unfair to them, and it's cruel in a way. They have taken a vow of chastity, and that is something that they take very seriously.
to be doing something cool. That was more or less the idea. It's very similar to the anti-chainmail bikini argument that's levied against depictions of fictional women in fantasy games, but applied to nuns. And sure, yeah, if you're making a character with a clear religious affiliation and you want to go for accuracy, maybe don't dress the character up like the anime idea of what a nun is, but personally, I don't really care about games for what I want to talk about today, so what else was going on? Because
Does anybody remember the machine gun wielding nuns from Hitman 3, I want to say?
this argument quickly spread from just being about games to being about fantasies and roleplays of all kinds, including the more adult versions like you see in Kink. And as it turns out, one of OP's original points, which was stated later on in the thread, was a belief that people were
Let me ask you this question. Let's take it away from Christianity for a second. In Buddhism, there are nuns and monks, and in Taoism, there are nuns and monks. How would you feel about the sexualization of that? Would that then bother you when it's no longer in a Christian or Western context? If it would bother you in that scenario, then it should bother you when it's in a Western context. Another one to think about is ancient nuns and monks. Let's go back to pre-Christian times. Let's talk about the Vestal Virgins. If sexualization of them is offensive to you, then maybe don't sexualize nuns and monks in modern times. I think that's a pretty good parallel.
doing this out of a sort of anti-Christian sentiment. Quote, what I tried to say is that people sexualize nuns because they hate Christianity. Just because Christianity and Catholicism has been the part of colonization and people who practice has done bad things, that doesn't give you pass to sexualize any of them. WTF.
Hi,
Dan?
we're visible.
No music.
Quotes, as much as I can discern them.
I need to buy drawing software so I can get back to my art. And it's the same price as getting a subscription to get the YouTube thing without the. Do you see the situation that YouTube just tries to put me in? It's so painful. It's so hard. Just
Give me an idea of what's really going on here. It's almost as though we are treating the sexualization of a role or a job as a concept as being the same as sexualizing a specific person, which, at least in my mind, is typically a whole other ballgame. I can see why someone might not be able to make the distinction, though. In the current internet age, especially on places like Twitter, there is a lot of miscommunication like this. People will hear things like aftercare is important after a BDSM scene, which is a good point, and then somehow translate that into not getting aftercare by default without asking for it is abusive, which is not really what we're going for. Or they hear how sexualizing real people without that person's consent, like maybe sending sexual DMs to a streamer or making deepfakes of them, is wrong, and then they start to apply that logic to fictional characters as well. You know, Dean and Castiel didn't and can't consent to your writing fanfic about them, so reading fanfic about them or writing fanfic about them doing stuff together is wrong. And taken a step further, I've even seen people worry that it's a consent violation to read a steamy scene in a novel or watch one on a television show, either because the fictional characters didn't give consent to our voyeurism as viewers or readers, or because the writers...
To be very blunt, B.S. Lewis, I have no idea if Judaism has nuns. They have an equivalent of, like, you can take a vow of chastity, but I don't know if they're called nuns. I don't know what they're called. I know that people have ascribed that position to Mary, but I don't know if that's actually historically true.
didn't get our consent to put those things in their stories because we might not want to read them. I do think there is a chance that this is all some kind of like 4D chess psyop and no one actually really believes this, but on the outside chance it is a genuine movement, there is something to be said for the childification of the young adult years that seems to be happening. You know, the whole I'm a 24-year-old teenager thing? And I do believe that mentality, insofar as it's real,
And I do think that's kind of gross and creepy, and I do think that has to stop.
could be part of why discourses like this are happening more often. You know, I'm basically still a baby, so it's a crime if I accidentally interact with a piece of media that I find distasteful. That's essentially the vibe. But I really don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill and make it seem like a few tweets from really small accounts represent some growing, dangerous movement we have to be aware of, because it's really not that. Maybe one day it will be, at which time we will address it. But treating it just on the level it is now, I still can't help but be a little worried when folks can't seem to distinguish between the consent of real people, literal, specific people, and the consent of fictional characters. I have to imagine that this in some way indicates there's been a breakdown of understanding, either of consent on the whole, or that flesh and blood people who happen to have jobs online are more real than characters in a video game, rather than being equivalent. The emotional intelligence here is concerning, and the confusion has happened enough that it does make me scratch my head and go, okay, what's happening here? Where did we go wrong? How is this confusing? And I think the connection to nun representation here is obvious. In the same way that people have trouble understanding consent as applied to real people versus fictional characters, they also have trouble understanding consent as applied to fantasy concepts or the, quote, sexualization of certain occupations. You know, roleplay things, or maybe having a kink for a specific kind of uniform. If sexualizing an internet personality is the same thing as sexualizing Sherlock, a BBC character, then why wouldn't a high...
But see, I do think Evie Lupin isn't taking into account how this relates to upcoming AI bots and AI art. Because we are getting to the point, and I know Futurama made a joke about it years ago, but we are getting to the point where you're going to have not only AI digital representations of this stuff, not those kind of nuns, Thomas, but not only are you going to have digital online, even AI and VR and AR avatars that you can do things with that will look and sound like real celebrities. But you're going to have real dolls, and you're going to have sex toys that will mimic real celebrities without the celebrity's permission. And if those machines ever get good enough to where you can mimic, humanity in any kind of way, you get a bootleg personality or bootleg copy of a friend's face or someone that you're interested in that you can't really get with. And they're doing stuff with that model, whether it's AI or real. You're now sexually objectifying someone. You're still not actually doing anything to the real person, but you have their likeness, you have their voice, and you have everything accurate, if you know what I mean. That can be very creepy and very dangerous. And if those photos ever get out, people won't be able to tell 100% whether that's really you or not. I think those have very dangerous implications. And I think, not that I'm saying the historical Jesus was thinking about AI and computer generation, but I think his implications here for why sins of the mind are so dangerous are very relevant here. I think that he's correct, because you say, oh, it's just a fantasy, so it's okay. And to a certain extent, yeah. The problem is that once that fantasy can be expressed in real life, that's now become a sin. That's become an actual action. And even though you're not with the physical person, you're now using their likeness, their essence almost, without their permission. I think that's very dangerous, and I think the implications are very real. Maybe when Jesus said it, you could say, well, that doesn't make any sense. The Jewish way of understanding this is more accurate, where sin of the mind doesn't matter, it's just sin of the action. And Jesus says, no, the sin of the mind and the sin of the action, they both count as sins. That made sense to Jesus, made sense to the Christians, didn't make sense to everybody else. The pagans didn't like it. The Jewish people didn't like it. Other atheists didn't like it. The rationalists didn't like it later on. But now look at where we are today, where the fantasy can become a type of reality. I think Jesus' words are more prophetic and more profound now than they were when he said them. I think they've only grown in immensity and in accuracy, because now you can take someone and make a digital representation of them that's so accurate, that's so real, that they themselves can't tell the difference. I think we're in danger territory of that. And I think Evie Lupin might be a little short-sighted here because of where technology is going in the near future.
None OC be the same as sexualizing a specific real-life person? I guess that would be the logical conclusion if that's really how you think about things. And there was actually another response to the original tweet I saw going around, which I think perfectly demonstrates why folks are...
And I think Evie Lupin does have, if I'm not mistaken, she is against AI-generated art that uses real people. So I do think there is going to have to be a more solid line. Like, and what's a fictional character? Think about that. This is already a problem. If you guys know about Rule 34, this is already a problem, which is, okay, so let's say the site that you have or the website that you have, even if it's just lewds, has a rule that it cannot be real people, but it can be fictional characters. So Botan, or whatever the chick is from Star Wars, okay? Well, a real actress is playing that character. So when does the likeness not be a parody of the character and it's a parody of the actress? These are real problems. These are real world problems, real world intellectual rights problems and artistic problems that are coming up. They're already here. They've been here for a while. People just haven't noticed. When is Empress, whoever was played by Natalie Portman, when is the Empress, and when is it Natalie Portman? Or any famous character. When is the AI art, or the art in general, the fantasy in general, not about the literal real actor and only the fictional character, when they are the same face and the same body?
So touchy about nuns specifically when it comes to all of this. They said, quote, like sexualizing nuns are weird for real, like they swore off sex for life, and now you're sexualizing them. It's like drawing Holocaust survivors as not as extreme, but still like, wow, oh my god. Thank you for the parenthetical at the end. That really cleared things up. And yes, that 4-letter word that starts with N is exactly the word you think it is in this context. Godwin's law strikes again. And so does the modern fascination with purity. I would argue that this would be a problem if anyone was, once again, sexualizing a specific person who happens to be a nun, but I've literally never seen that happen. But why sexualize?
Yeah, I was Catholic. I've seen that happen. Come on, be real.
The role of nuns in general.
I've seen literal famous interviewers sexualize priests on TV as they're interviewing the priest. You're not being honest. If you're saying a statement like that, you're not being honest.
As a concept, why would that be in any way intriguing?
All anyone has to do is be a celebrity and they can be sexualized. Nowadays, you don't even need to be a celebrity, just have a photo out there. Don't be naive. You're literally the definition of someone who's not naive. So don't play that game.
Looking at it from just a sexology perspective and not from a religious or a historical one, we have a few readily available explanations. We know, for example, that taboo is a key fantasy theme for many folks.
To get started in data analytics, you don't need previous experience.
According to Justin Miller's research, the 4th most common reason for having a fantasy was, quote, to express or fulfill a socially taboo sexual desire. His research has also shown that 87% of men
Hold on, this
and
seems about to die. I'll be
72%
right
of
back.
women have engaged in fantasies about taboo subjects. Taboo is such a common fantasy theme that it's more popular than passion and romance. And I will say, hearing that folks with a certain bias may interpret that as being evidence that society is becoming more and more degenerate, but I am not so sure that that is the only reason. Referencing another frequently cited author on this channel, Jack Morin, he explains in his work that taboo fantasies often come from attempting to cope with disgust, fear, and other intense feelings. By sublimating the feeling with sexual arousal, it becomes easier to deal with and recontextualizes that feeling in our minds. And knowing that, it's not really a wonder to me that in a society full of sexual shame for basically any kind of sexual thought or feeling, we'd then see people pop up with taboo fantasies to process all of that shame. Be that with voyeurism, exhibitionism, humiliation kinks, or being turned on by the wrong kind of person, like a celibate nun, or indeed the wrong kind of person being turned on themselves. And what could be more wrong than a person who has sworn off sex for life and intimate pleasure as well, experiencing arousal, being seduced, or even being the seduced?
There's still a problem of consent. If your ultimate moral objectivity in our ultimate moral dividing line in sexuality is simply consent, which I'm not saying it is. It's more complicated than that, I know. But let's say that it is. Let's say that you've made that argument. Well, then they're not consenting to being sexualized. Not just them, the individual, but them as the entire group. The entire group then becomes unlimited, unavailable for your fantasization, for your fantasization, whatever.
Themselves. The connection then seems pretty obvious to me. Now, another obvious connection is early life exposure. If you were someone who went to Catholic school or otherwise interacted with nuns at a young age, it would not be outside the realm of possibility that you might have linked them to feelings of.
But again, let's go back to your original argument that you said that this never happens in actuality. What about this? So every time that the guy or the girl is doing something sexual in a fetishish or taboo way, and they're doing active role play, the nun that they are visualizing, either they are role playing as or having their partner role play as, or the priest that they're having them role play as, or role playing as themselves, is an actual person. Even if they slightly fictionalize the person or over dramatize the person, or dramatize the person in general, it's still a real person that they are sexualizing. Does that change your equation? Does it suddenly now become not okay now that the person being sexualized cannot consent?
Arousal. This is a common explanation for fettuccinis. If y'all have watched my channel before, you know what that is a code word for. The classic example goes something like this. So, someone going through the early stages of sexual development will see or interact with something while experiencing feelings of arousal for the first time. Let's say it's a pair of stockings. The pair of stockings becomes associated with feelings of pleasure, which then motivates that person to seek more of that same pleasure out using the pair of stockings, which then strengthens that connection between the two with repeated interactions. And then you repeat that enough times, and bingo, bango, bongo, you've got yourself a whole plate of fettuccine, so to speak. Anyway, if you catch my drift.
That's makeup, right? That's not like an... That's not our actual skin color, right? That's either makeup or it's a filter. I can get pretty pale, but even that level of pale doesn't seem natural.
And if you were someone who was ever punished by or scolded by a nun, a similar process could also easily happen.
If that is natural and not a skin condition, I am very impressed by your ability to avoid the sun at all costs. And I'm worried about your vitamin D proficiency. I hope you're taking your vitamins E, D, and there's a third one you need for the sun. What's the third one you can only get from the sun? It's E, D, and there's another one.
deal with the shame or physical pain of that experience, it may be transmuted into an erotically charged memory, or it may be something that
Oh,
you
you're vegan too, right? I hope you're getting your iron shots.
want to recreate in an erotic context. Doubly so if that shame was sexual in nature to begin with. Like maybe you were punished for being caught Googling naughty words during school hours. I mean, honestly, how can we be surprised?
Not everything's an innuendo, B.S. Lewis.
Some people may sexualize nuns in their private fantasies when we've got this many reasons for fantasies about them to exist. And listen, I have not even gotten into the folks who have
Oh, and I hope she's taking iron pills too. Man, there's a lot of vitamins you're going to have to be taking. I thought about not being a vegan. Just a question.
broader reasons for fantasizing about churches or priests or nuns or the whole general motif of the Catholic Church. Like folks who maybe weren't.
And again, that's why I'm trying to expand it beyond the Catholic Church. There are Buddhist monks. There are Taoist monks. There are Buddhist monks. There are Taoist monks. There are ancient monks from before Christianity. So I'm going to a more broader scale.
Directly punished by nuns, but were hurt by their upbringing in the Catholic Church in some way. They would have a pretty good reason to have that sort of connection. Or people who have a cultural history of experiencing harm at the hands of clergy members, as a lot of indigenous folk do. People, well, therefore, naturally, sometimes have fantasies about power and corruption involving that church or nuns or priests.
So
and it
tired
would
of power plus privilege. I'm so tired of that equation.
not be unheard of. So
Get away from the woke. You have a great mind. You have a great channel. Get away from woke thinking, please. You're brilliant. You can help so many more people with their sexual problems if you just simply get away from the wokeness.
all of this is really to say that I think
By the way, she's not the most woke sexual advice YouTuber I've ever seen, and I think that's why she survived while other more prominent, more famous sexual advice YouTubers rise and then disappear forever. I'm thinking about Chris Reagan's girlfriend. You know, there's a reason why she's lasted. She knows what she's doing, but I do think she flirts with the wokeism too often.
fantasies about nuns or representing nuns in a sexualized fashion as a way of, subverting the typical imagery of the church is both common and easily explained. It's not about violating a real-life nun's consent, but about coping with pain, trauma, shame, or simply enjoying a taboo. And the same can easily be said for most roleplay and uniform fantasies, whether they're based on teachers or schoolgirl skirts or nurses or maids or anything like that. It's also important to remember that for many, nuns are about as real in their everyday lives as wizards or historically accurate Victorian housekeepers. They're characters you might see on TV, but they're not people you interact with in your everyday existence. And yet, I'm not seeing anyone get out the pitchforks for folks who have Victorian household-based fantasies, because we realize those fantasies aren't about specific real-life people or even historical figures, at least most of the time, but about the attributes and attitudes we assign to them. Having a fantasy about a Victorian housemaid is not necessarily going to harm a current modern-day real-life maid. Fantasies are not real life, and ideally, it should be a place where we can safely explore.
Okay, but if you're going to say that, then you're going to have to be consistent, and I don't think you can be consistent with that, with what you're saying. I just don't think you can be. I don't think you can make it work to where you're going to have to say that violent video games don't cause violence, which I don't believe they do, but you're going to have to get there. You're going to have to say that conservatives living a conservative lifestyle doesn't infringe on your freedom. You're going to have to do a lot to show that someone's entertainment, someone's way of thinking, someone's fantasies doesn't equate harm to the other, which as a Republican, as a Christian, as a Catholic, I can have all those thoughts without worrying about being consistent, because that is the way free will works. But if you're coming from a different perspective, especially from a deterministic perspective, which I'm assuming you believe in determinism, and you don't believe in free will, or at least not in that way. Let's say you don't believe in libertarian free will, you don't believe in the soul, you don't believe in a God, you don't believe in objectivity in the sense that a Christian means it, then when you're making a judgment call that, say, violent video games or certain type of political rhetoric, it should not be allowed, how do you then be consistent when it's your own side that's now doing the problematic thing? Something that you're okay with. Is it only okay because you say it's okay? But it's not okay when it's something that we say is okay? You see what I mean? It creates a us versus them mentality, even though it's on a subconscious level.
Or thoughts and ideas without judgment. Assuming, of course, those ideas don't translate into permission.
Yes, actually, Thomas comes in with the save every time. When I start rambling, he gets exactly what I'm trying to lean toward. So either I'm not as smart as I think I am, or he's twice as smart as I actually am. He says it's a paraphilia wrapped inside a religion, holding. Let me get my little thing. Holding. Hidden in a phobia. That's 100% correct. A paraphilia wrapped inside a religion, hidden in a phobia. 100%. That's what I was saying. But better than what I said.
For real world harm. And that is the case with certain fantasies. Listen, I'm not a sex therapist, so I'm not really going to get into that conversation, but that is an unstated part of the argument, right? Sexualizing and objectifying people is wrong because it harms them in some way, and it should be against our values to harm people. For this particular case with nuns, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that some random sister in Bolivia is not meaningfully harmed by you drawing a spicy picture featuring the concept of a nun on a website that she will never visit. So that leaves real-world direct harm as a possibility. Now, unsurprisingly, I wasn't able to find any studies about nun-based fantasies leading to violence or permissive attitudes towards violence. So I'm going to guess that this is not a major factor in violence towards nuns. This is not to say that nuns do not experience violence, whether it be from clergy or lay people in the Catholic Church or random men who think ruining a pure, chaste woman is some kind of perfect revenge.
It's not a Catholic Church thing. Like, nuns have been... I mean, just go to fiction if you want to. Since we were talking about that I was talking about that just a second ago. You weren't. The favorite place for vampires to attack are covens. Okay, like don't act like this is out of left field. Come on. You like vampire fiction just as much as I do. Look at how you dress. Okay, we're both wearing all black here with a little bit of white. Don't pretend with me. Okay, where are we? It's fifth play.
And I don't doubt that nuns, especially as women, are subject to violence.
If you don't get why that was funny, that's a face. If you don't get why that's funny, because she's talking about role play, and I said, "Don't play with me." Huh, get it? Funny. Why aren't you laughing? Why isn't my audience laughing? This was funny. It was funny. Laugh.
Don't see how a random bisexual woman on DeviantArt drawing nuns kissing would contribute to that risk for harm. But forgive me if I'm missing something. Feel free to correct me if there is a flaw in my logic here. I'm just not seeing the connection to real-world harm happening or even permission for it. And I do find it interesting that some folks are defensive towards nuns, specifically because they've taken celibacy pledges. Like that makes it more wrong to fantasize about the idea of a nun compared to a woman in literally any other role. Forgive me again if I'm missing something here. But if we are drawing a parallel between the fantasy version of a job as an abstract concept and specific real-world people who have that job experiencing harm, wouldn't it be just as wrong to fantasize about a bikini model, for example? Bikini models do not implicitly consent.
Congratulations, you just became a Catholic apologist. You got the answer correct. You can pass go, come back and collect your Catholic card. You can get $1,000 plus 1 day to talk to the Pope one-on-one. over the phone, not in person. You can't tell anyone about it. But the Pope will now talk to you. Congratulations on winning your prize.
To being part of a stranger's fantasy life. Their consent should also matter, and they certainly don't consent to being sexualized outside of the very specific frame they present themselves in, which they control and they have a say over.
Yes.
You can't assume they'd be down for literally whatever thing simply because
she just became a Catholic apologist. I'm not even kidding. Congratulations on your brand new Christianity and Catholicism. Let me know when you're ready to get baptized.
Their job. So it seems to me like
if you've already been baptized, let me know when you're ready to go to confession. Oh, that's going to be a good one for that priest.
Like we might have some unresolved issues around how we perceive women and value their consent based on if we see them as pure, virginal, or good even.
And remember, when you go back to confession, you are required to talk and confess every sin you've made since you've left. Every sin. All of them. We might need a few priests.
Might even be able to argue that, actually, it's sexualizing women to say they should cover up, like nuns do, to avoid being seen as sexual objects.
Actually, that's not why nuns don't cover up, because they're trying to avoid being seen as sexual objects. That is a misconception and a lie. So that is actually the common dress, the plain dress of that time period. Same thing with the priestly outfits. The priestly outfits are not actually priestly outfits. They're just the outfits of the priest from that time. So how a priest dressed and how ancient people were dressed are a little bit more in common, because they're supposed to be dressed in humble clothes, humble rags. The sackcloth. That's what you're trying to emulate. The nun stuff gets a little bit more complicated because of the veiling and other aspects that then become hidden, especially in the medieval period. I've read 2 books on this. I am not an expert on it. I did not pay great attention to the 2 books I read on them. I've seen 1 or 2 specials, and I've heard 2 or 3 nuns from 3 different, 3 nuns from 3 different traditions, Orthodox, Catholic, and Tibetan, explain the evolution of the garb that they wear. So it actually has nothing to do with desexualization. It has to do with the time period that their institutes were initiated. So when those offices began, that was the outfit of a humble person at that time. It wasn't supposed to be a sign of non-sexuality. The outfit, that is, it was supposed to be a sign of humility. And today on educating, I don't know if she's an atheist, sexual therapist? That'll be $1,000, please. Give me money.
That women's natural bodies are inherently sexual and open to consumption and objectification at all times if not properly put away. Like an object. But we don't really have time to get into all of that. I'm just saying.
Also, you're not supposed to sexualize men either, so that goes both ways. So men are supposed to also be covered up. Hence the Protestant idea, that weird outfit people used to wear all the time in the 50s that didn't actually exist.
Could be a conversation that we have, but we don't have time to get into all that, because the last big topic I want to get into is the history of sexuality and the church. I don't think you're going to get college credits for this one because this is not a religion seminar, so I'm going to be skipping over a lot here, I am sure, but some of the bigger aspects of this are hard to ignore.
It kind of bothers me that I'm familiar with this material she's about. I haven't watched this video before, by the way. I'm totally blindly reacting to her. It upsets me that I'm already familiar with the material she's about to go over. I've read a lot, and not all of it good. Not all of it for decent human beings.
And I want an opportunity to highlight them. Are we really not?
Thank you, Val. To the girl who pursued me and got me to read the Marquis de Sade. Thank you for this. So I can have this conversation 20 years later on YouTube to 2 people.
I'm going to talk about all of the...
Are you driving way less than you used?
art of Jesus and various saints. I mean, my God, it was basically a free-for-all of abs and brooding dudes. But, Saint Sebastian didn't consent to being drawn like that, so how horrible. We're violating the saint's consent in the modern day by gazing upon it, I suppose. But it's not just the saints or paintings either. The medieval Beguines, female members of lay religious orders, frequently described
Much of this art was actually controversial in its day. It wasn't just controversial now, it was controversial in its day for many of the same reasons. And it's why a lot of depictions of it were later covered up. Even in museums, they would actually desecrate ancient art and cover it up with fig leaves or simply break the phallus off. There are actual whole areas in different museums of just phalluses where they've broken the phallus off, they broke the boob off, or they broke the vagina off, so that way people couldn't see them. This wasn't just controversial today. It wasn't just controversial yesterday or 1,000 or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It's been controversial since the beginning. Even if you go back into ancient times, one of the best and most interesting trials is the trials of the missing phalluses, where a guy was actually kicked out of his country because one drunken night he decided to take all the dicks off the statues. He was executed for that, by the way. It led to the execution of Socrates. Anyway, yeah. So this is not a new thing. So she's, again, either actually naive or pretending to be naive to make a point.
Events they experienced in very erotic terms. For example, they relayed their intense emotional experience of Christ by combining the concept of courtly love with lines from the Song of Songs. And if you don't know what that is, because you've never read the Bible, it's what I would call the unrepentantly horny part of the Bible. It's very unique amongst all of the various sections therein, but
it's sexual. It's very, very sexual.
Even describing
and communion has been seen by some as intercourse, as a type of sexual. Well, sexual is the wrong word. Sensual is the right word. A type of sensual ecstasy. Not sexual, but sensual ecstasy. That's very true. So she's not lying. She's just miscabobulating a little bit. You like the word miscabobulating? Made it up myself right now.
Eucharist was an opportunity for ye olde horny posting. I am being quite serious. Throughout the Middle Ages, female mystics in particular described spiritual unification with Christ in explicitly, intentionally carnal terms. The idea, at least in part...
But carnal here doesn't mean sex. Carnal means actual meat, physical terms. Like meat, carnal, like carne, like meat, like carne guisada.
Was to embrace Christ as a sort of divine healing lover with whom a union would...
Yes, and till today, some nuns take vows of marriage to Jesus. That's true. And I'm not sure, but I think some priests take vows of marriage to the church. This is not a new thing. So your little plain, is it not, is not accurate. These are explicit truths inside the Catholic Church. This is the reason why Protestants don't like us. Protestants don't like us for many reasons. It's not just the Pope thing, even though that's what everybody likes to concentrate on.
Offer spiritual virginity and therefore redemption, most notably through the side wound Jesus suffered during his crucifixion, which was often depicted and described in yonic terms. As one nun put it, and the soul bent herself over the wound and the sweet heart of her only Savior, and drank therefrom deep draughts of all deliciousness and sweetness. Like, come on, people. Whew. No, not you, Jesus. You're not supposed to come. That was not the script. And I know. We're reading all of this through a very modern lens and all. But the whole point...
I didn't appreciate that joke, but whatever. It's her channel. I'm the one choosing to watch it.
at the time was that such a union with Christ, especially for women, would restore the all-important spiritual virginity, even if the flesh had strayed, as it would have to in a marriage that produced children. Some depictions were even less subtle, though, with prints depicting Jesus literally getting naked in bed with a woman to save her soul, or at least she was naked. I don't really remember exactly. I'll show it on screen. But there's one more example I really want to talk about. We actually have the story depicted.
This is slightly cherry picking, but more like missing the context. It would be like saying, like, those who took virginal vows to either Isis or to Penelope, or I'm trying to think of another virgin goddess that's famous. Well, I think there are even virgins who served Hathor, if I'm not mistaken. It would be like saying that because they may or may not have to be put away because of something that happened to them, which even happened in the ancient world, that they weren't considered virgins spiritually and renewed. They were. And they had to take their vows very seriously. And if they didn't stay a virgin, they would be killed. Even if they had had sex beforehand for non-consensual reasons. Once their parents consecrated them to the god or goddess, they would then have to stay a virgin. And if they ever broke that vow, it was considered a major thing to where she would have to be killed, either buried alive or burnt alive. This is in ancient times, it's pre-Christian times. So, again, you are acting naive about things that I don't think you're actually naive about. I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts that you and I have read the same fictions, that you and I have read the same mythologies. I don't think we've read the same religious stuff. I don't think we have the same educational history. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, based on my experience with your channel and with people in the communities that you are in, we probably have the same reading history and probably have the same movie history and probably have the same music history. So we both have the same references. So you're overplaying your naivety about things you're not actually naive about.
In a 19th century Calderon painting titled Saint Elizabeth of Hungary's Great Act of Renunciation, in which the nude titular character debases herself before God, renounces the world and her children, and vows to follow her naked Lord. I mean, is anyone really wondering at this point why nuns are also called the brides of Christ? At least historically, there is a somewhat literal interpretation of that fact.
It's not just historically. It's literally, that's the interpretation. I just said that like 5 minutes ago. Weren't you listening? Can't you hear me in the past when I'm watching this in the future and commenting? Why aren't you paying attention to what I'm saying? Just like a woman never listens.
And the whole point of me bringing all this up is to show that the Catholic Church...
It doesn't matter how edgy I try to be. No one's ever watching this channel. I love you, BS, but you can take as many clips as you want. No one's ever watching this channel. But Eva Lupin, all jokes aside, you're welcome to come on my channel. I still want to talk to you.
in particular
I
has
actually
been
do want to talk to Eva Lupin. I've been a fan of hers for years.
aggressively, deeply horny, often because of its fixation on physical celibacy, and so therefore we should not be shocked when people pick up on these
I've been looking for it and I can't find it. Back when I was in polyamorous, I used to listen to a website. I used to listen to a podcast. It was back when podcasts were actually podcasts because they were on the little spin dial Apple thing. I wasn't opening up. It was something polyamory. I just can't remember what. I'm trying to remember the host name because I can remember Tristan Taormino's name. Can't remember the host of the other one. She also wrote a ton of books, and I couldn't find her books anymore. I don't know what happened to her.
overtones, undertones, tones, themes, the point in general, and then further eroticize those things for less spiritual purposes. Gatekeeping who gets to do this and how is always going to fail, because we can't control what other people are thinking. So long as no one is going out there and ruining any real nuns' days, I don't see why we should really be all that fussed about it. In fact, further stigmatizing it, like most taboo interests, seems much more likely to cement it rather than get rid of it.
I have mixed thoughts about what she just said. I'm going to let this keep going so we get to the next video, but I have mixed thoughts about her comment there.
And the same goes for all of the other common uniform and occupation-based fantasies out there. Like,
okay. The problem with that is that then you can't illegalize or tabooize or scandalize anything. And there has to be a line. I said this about the Donald Trump stuff. There has to be a line. There has to be a point where it's not acceptable. Whether you want to say there's a certain age that's unacceptable, where you want to say there's a certain group of people that shouldn't be, like a certain career that shouldn't be acceptable, if you want to say there's a certain, gender or whatever, there has to be a line with everything. Otherwise, there's no rules whatsoever. And we have rules, and we have them for a reason. Let me go to our final thoughts, and then because I played way more of a video than I wanted to. I thought I was just going to play like 15 minutes, but this was good. Evie Lupin, good video.
from a religious background, if you went through divinity school or something, or maybe you went to Catholic school, I would love to hear all your thoughts and feelings, because especially when it comes to religion.
I'm right here. Right. You're talking to me. You want it? You want to talk religion and sex and all that kind of stuff? I'm your guy. Okay? Those other apologists, they won't do it. I'm an anti-apologist. I'll do it. You know what I'm saying? Bad Catholic to bad Catholic. You know? We talk about some heavy stuff. We end it drinking some absinthe. You know what I mean? That's what we do. Okay. You're invited onto my channel. We open it up with a glass of wine. We then talk for 15 minutes about nothing. Doesn't matter what it is, just can't be anything serious. We then have the serious debate. Regardless of where we end on the conversation, we each get out a glass of absinthe, and we finish the last 15 minutes drinking absinthe, talking about what we just talked about, but no longer arguing about it. I think that's a great episode. I think this has to happen. Someone who watches her channel, who watches my channel, let's get it done.
I know it's a very touchy subject in kink, especially when you have people that are outside of a religion, maybe using another religion as an aspect of their fantasy landscape. Thank you all so much for watching, and you can leave a thought or comment down.
Good, we're done. Let's go one more video, guys, and then we're going to call it a night. Let's do this so I don't accidentally show anything I don't want to show. Okay. What's next? Which one's the next one? I had a whole bunch of them in a list. Like, I did a good job of curating today, and I'm not going to get through everything. All right. So here's the choice for those who are watching currently. Give me a vote. We have two choices. We have the Council of Trent on the Evil God Challenge, or we have Shameless Popery on Who Created God. Which one do you guys want to do? Whoever votes first, that's the one we're going to do. Evil God or Who Created God? Come on. Someone give me an answer. Someone give me an answer. I know there's a delay, so I'll give it a second. Let me know which one you want. Do you want to do Trent Horn and Evil God Challenge, or Shameless Popery, Joe Heschmeyer, Who Created God? Let me get a vote in the chat, please. Vote in the chat, or we're going to be stuck here waiting forever. You're going to hear me just asking for a vote. Somebody vote, please. Who created God? All right, there we go.
There are thousands.
I love commercials. No, I don't. Okay, when this video is done, we're going to be done for the night. I still have to exercise and do some other stuff.
Is this idea that we don't need a creator. One of the most common arguments I hear against Christianity and against religion more broadly is this idea that we don't need a creator. If you say, hey, creation needs a creator, the response is also, well, who made God or who created God? In fact, this is such a common problem, it has its own Wikipedia entry called The Problem of the Creator of God. You'll find versions of this from some of the better known atheists, but I encountered it recently on Twitter, or ex-Twitter, and I liked the way the problem was presented. It was clear. The person, the atheist, responded, if you say everything must have a creator, their response is, well, if everything must have a creator, then your God needs a creator, and his creator needs a creator, and so on ad infinitum. But if you say everything
Grr, was this you?
except God needs a creator, then allegedly, you're making special exceptions just to keep
Was it you, Danny? Was it Danny? Was it Grr? Who was it?
your false beliefs intact. Your fallacy is called special pleading. Look it up. Well, I've actually studied logic,
Is it possible it was deconverted man?
and that's not what special pleading is. Now, I can show at a glance why this objection doesn't work, or we can take kind of a deeper dive. Let's start with kind of the at a glance. So imagine you're driving. You approach a railroad crossing. You don't see the start of the train. You just see one passenger car after another flying by. Now, even though you don't see the front of the train, you can know to a great degree of certainty.
It's interesting that he's like, I've studied philosophy, and yet he's doing the very standard argument here. He's not even presenting it in his own words. He's using the exact formula, which I guess is fine. It's fine. But then he shouldn't make it sound like he's the one saying it, because he's quoting. He is quoting all of this.
That the train has a front with an engine. After all, you know two things. Number one, the passenger cars or boxcars or whatever they are, they can pull the cars behind them, but they can't pull themselves. Instead, they've got to be pulled by someone or something else. Well, number two, you know that there can't just be an infinite number of passenger cars. Even if, hypothetically, there were an infinite number, which we avoid the logical impossibility of that. Even if you had an infinite number, whether you have 1, a million, or an infinite number of passenger cars, if they're moving, someone or something is moving them. So then you just need an infinitely powerful engine. You haven't gotten rid of the problem of the engine at all. So however you solve it, you have, at the end of it, have to have an engine. Because a passenger car, if you want to put it this way, it's like a moved mover. Meaning this. That's kind of technical language. All it means is this. It's a mover. It's pulling the car behind it. It's doing a great job of that. But it doesn't pull itself.
Oh, the
explanation for its movement, we might say, is external. It's the car in front of it. If you want to say, why is this car moving? The most direct answer to that is the car in front of it is pulling it. But then you might say, well, why is that car moving? And eventually, you have to get up to an unmoved mover. Now, an unmoved mover, in this case, just means the explanation for why it's moving isn't external, like a car in front of it. It's internal, the engine, to the engine car. That engine, that internal explanation, explains not only why it's moving, but ultimately explains why...
Oh, this philosophy 101. He's not even going with the hard version of this one. Okay.
Every other car in the series is moving. So imagine you went through all of that, and then your smart alecky passenger in the car says, aha, that's special pleading. Who's pulling the engine? Now, hopefully you realize they just don't understand the difference between a passenger car and an engine. They don't get the difference between a moved mover and an unmoved mover. So that's one of the easiest explanations.
No. The harder question to ask is not who is moving the engine. It's what's causing the engine to move. You change the question from a what, from a who, to a what. Eventually, you have to get to the why. Why is the engine moving? That's where the real fun happens in philosophy. Not who.
I think, for explaining why we don't believe God has a creator. Because the whole point is unmoved mover. The whole point is to explain why anything exists, there has to be at least one thing, person, place, thing, being, one thing that doesn't have to be created, doesn't have to have some prior existing thing to explain its own existence.
The uncreated creator.
Because otherwise, you're left with an infinite number of passenger cars and nobody to pull them. And in that case, the passenger cars don't go anywhere.
As Tertullian would say, the supreme being. There can only be one supreme being, because if there's more than one supreme being, it's not a supreme being. I said that with yogurt on my face. Yay.
So that's one way to talk about it in terms of movement. Another way to talk about it, using slightly different technical language, is contingency. Now, what do I mean by contingency? There's three things we have to get clear here. And I think each of these three things is self-evidently...
I was never great at the argument from contingency, by the way, so I'm going to let him take this one.
Clear that you'll hear it and say, well, of course, that's undeniably true. The first thing, everything in...
I'm sorry, Dr. Nelson. You were a great professor, And I'm sorry, Dr. Basham, you were a great professor. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the third one. But all four of my philosophy professors, I'm sorry. I'm not including my rhetoric or logic professors, by the way. Contingency was not my best. Was not my strong suit.
Everyone that we encounter in the entire universe is contingent. Everyone you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard, tasted, touched, smelled, etc., is contingent. Contingent just means it exists and didn't have to exist, or it exists and didn't always exist. St. Thomas Aquinas puts it like this. He says, we find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be. Like they could exist, they could not exist. How do we know if something is contingent? A real clear giveaway is if it didn't used to exist, because then it both wasn't.
You know, I'm not a fan of Thomas Aquinas, so maybe that's why I'm not great at contingency. I don't like Thomas Aquinas. I'm gonna be really blunt. I mean, I like, as a human being, sure, I love him. As a fellow Catholic, amazing. I hope he's in heaven. I think he's in heaven. He's a saint. He's probably in heaven. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying him as a philosopher, as a writer. I don't enjoy his works. They are not written well. Either they're not written well or they're not translated well. But it's a lot, and it's boring, and it's dry.
And now is. I didn't exist prior to 1984. You go back to 1983, I'm not there. Therefore, you know for sure I'm contingent, meaning I only exist under certain conditions. And so that means a lot of things have to come together for me to exist. So things that either are born or die, that's a giveaway of contingency. Now notice, contingency is not just like me coming into existence, it's also me staying in existence. I'm contingent upon my parents, but also on food, air, water, and so on. The list is enormous. The temperature being just right on Earth. All of these things, the rotation of the Earth, fill in the blank, you could come up with any number of these things. All of these things are contingencies. And if they're not all just right, I don't exist or you don't exist.
But tell me what's the difference between a contingency and a variable. Anybody?
You're on Earth. Well, if you think about, okay, well, where did those things come from? Now you're in something like the passenger cars. Where did my parents come from? Well, it turned out a lot of things had to exist for them to be here. What about air? A lot of things have to go right for it to be here, and so on. You get the idea, right? But you, second, can't just have an infinite number of those and that be the end of the story. Because here's why. Contingent things need someone or something else to account for their existence. Just like the passenger car, you had to look outside of the car to the car in front of it to explain why the car is moving. With the contingent thing, you have to look outside.
Hold on, let me get to my little app now that I have a widget. But I need to have a widget up here. I want you guys to be able to see the chat. I know you guys, you know what I'm saying. I'm trying to look more professional and more good and more clippable. The Pantheist Icon by John Tolan would help his understanding. It would probably help my understanding, though. Like I said, I'm not the best when it comes to contingency arguments. I'm just not. I wish I was, but I'm not the best at that one. There are other philosophical and theological arguments that I'm much stronger at, both in explaining and in agreeing with and defending, and also attacking. This just isn't one that I'm great at.
Of the thing to the conditions, the air, the water, the parents, etc., to explain why it exists. That's what it is to be contingent, and you and I are contingent. But here's the kicker.
See, the problem is that I don't believe that all things have to have a cause. I just don't. I really don't. I don't believe everything has to have a reason. I believe things can be random. I believe in randomness. I believe in chaos. I believe in not anarchy for anarchy's sake, but as in, I believe that once something happens, it does have consequences. There's no doubt about that. But I don't believe that for something to happen, it has to have a necessary reason.
Not everything can be a contingent thing. Now you might say, like,
so everything results in an action, but not every action results from an initial cause. Sometimes shit just goes wrong. That's my own personal belief. I realize it has nothing to do with this, but it is why I have a problem with contingent argumentation, and reasoning.
Well, how do we know it's not only contingent things? Just like how do we know it's not only passenger cars? Think about a Midwestern four-way stop. I say Midwestern because we're proud of our manners in driving. And this often means people will approach a four-way stop. And
South Texas, rolling stops all the way. We don't slow down. We just, you know what I mean? I'm just saying.
And if you get there at roughly the same time, both people want the other person
Rolling
to go
stops
first. Now
for
imagine
life.
a four-way stop where all four cars get there at exactly the same time, and every driver says, I'm not going to go first until somebody else.
Texas, where we do rolling stops unless we see a bicyclist, and then we panic and threaten them with big trucks. The scariest thing about riding a bike in Texas and hiking in Texas is not the wolves or the snakes, because they exist. It's the big trucks, because the big trucks never slow down and they just go straight through and you're squished. There are so many white bicycles. If you don't know, here in Texas, pretty much anytime someone gets run over by a truck, it is really always a truck. What they do is they put a white bicycle where that bicyclist was. I haven't seen them ever do anything for hikers, because there's a few hikers and marathon runners that got hit by trucks here. I'm talking about pickup trucks, 4x4s, extended cabs, the one with the double wheels on the side. They just don't pay attention to stop signs or to passenger ways. And now that we've added more bike ways and more hiking ways, they actually got rid of our old track that we used to use to safe run at night, because now they built all this pathways and trails where I live, and semi-trucks, pickup trucks just fucking floor it, and they kill people a lot. Like it's a real problem.
else goes. They're all contingent, right? Their driving is contingent upon one of the other drivers going first. Now, if all four of them decide that, bad news. Nobody's going anywhere, right? Because A is dependent on B, and B is dependent on C, and C is dependent on D, and D is dependent on A. And since none of them are willing to just go...
I see too many philosophical parallels with other bad argumentations. This reminds me of the turtle and the hare question about when does the tortoise catch up to the hare, or when does the hare catch up to the tortoise? It never can. It's when do you actually start walking forward? Because no matter how many times you half its distance, by making the distance half, you never quite get to the actual spot. You're always catching up, and you'll never quite get there because you're always dividing. So the first half, and then you divide that by half again, and you divide it by half again, and you never get to the point where you need to be, because it becomes an infinite problem. Because there's an infinite amount of halves between the two objects. So this reminds me of that kind of bad argumentation, because it has no basis in actual reality. Because in actual reality, no matter how much math you use, no matter how much you try to prove you're not moving forward, no matter how much you try to prove determinism is true and free will is false, no matter how much you do it, we're walking forward. We catch up to the person, or we pass the person. It happens. Movement is real. Choice is real. Choice happens. So it doesn't matter how much science you have showing there is no choice. Eventually we make a choice. We make a decision. So just like other bad philosophical arguments, no matter how impressive they are, this argument fails on the basis that it has no correlation to actual lived reality. It's only true on paper. It's only true in theory. It has no practical application.
You're stuck there. Now, I may be working out my own traffic trauma, but that's the basic idea. That if all of the players involved are contingent upon all the other ones, nothing ever happens. If I'm only going to the party if Steve goes there, and Steve's only going to go if I'm there.
I'm going to get some nasal stuff.
We're never going to go to the party.
Too much, guys.
Unless we, show up together. But the idea there is, if I'm only going to go if he's already there, That sort of thing. That's what contingency looks like. So what you need is someone or something that isn't contingent. So what do we know? Well, if it has a beginning or an end, it's contingent. So a necessary thing. Necessary just means not contingent. Why is it necessary? Because it can't have a beginning, it can't have an end, because that's a sign of contingency. If it's born, if it dies, if there's ever a time it didn't exist, if there's ever any conditions under which it didn't exist, we know there must be something else. St. Thomas Aquinas puts it like this. If at one time nothing was in existence, like if at one time there was just nothing, you're never going to get the conditions to get anything. So if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist. If you say everything in the universe exists under certain conditions, and at one point there was nothing, you have no conditions. And so nothing can come into being. You can't say originally there was nothing, and then when the conditions were just right, the universe popped into being. No, if you've got nothing, you have no conditions, and therefore the universe doesn't pop into being. That's as simple as it is. So if at one time there was nothing, then it would be impossible for anything to ever exist. And even now, we would have nothing, which is absurd because we realize this is not nothing. Existence exists.
But if absurdity is a condition for falsification on one end, how can absurdity not be a condition for falsification on your own end? Again, that's my problem with contingency arguments.
Therefore,
it does sound like special pleading because somehow your version of the argument is exempt from the very exact problem that you're pointing out in the other person's problem. To me, that is special pleading. So that makes the atheist you're arguing with correct, at least on this one point.
Don't just have conditional things. We don't have things that just are merely possible, but there must be something which has necessary existence. There must be something that always has existed, always will exist.
Him missing that T that first time bothered me in my brain. I was like, oh. You missed that T and he listened, and it bothered me in a real way. Ugh.
That gets us to a necessary being. Now, I want to be clear about the limitations of the argument. At this point, we don't know everything about the unmoved mover. We don't know everything about the God who created all of existence. We know a few things, though. We know, for one, that the God of the universe isn't in the universe because everything in the universe is contingent. We know a second thing, the God of the universe...
But then there becomes a problem with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, who are both acting in the universe. Do you understand how that is special pleading? I'm not saying that special pleading disqualifies us from being correct. Because again, actual reality overrides theoretical limitation. But it is still a special pleading argument. So better your argument.
Must be eternal. Cannot have a beginning, cannot have an end. That's logically required by this. We know
Tertullian did this much better, dude. Okay? You have to argue about what God is first and then define what God is. Supreme, absolute. Then you add the characteristics from later theologians. Omnipotent, omnipresent, whichever ones you want to use. Okay? Outside of time, outside of space. You use all the qualifiers, all the descriptors. You have a definition of God. Whatever doesn't fit that definition is by definition not God. That's the way the argument goes. That's classic theology. That's just classic theology. I understand that Thomas Aquinas is the king of classic theology, but your version of this argument is not as good as Thomas Aquinas's. Either that, or I have strongly overestimated Thomas Aquinas's argument. Thomas says, special pleading poopies is so common in apologetics. I really thought, I don't know why, I must have been high. I really thought that he was going to come to your defense. I really thought, just like Thomas saves me when I'm rambling, I thought he was going to come and save you, Joe Heschmeyer, and he did not. He simply poo-pooed on your on your bad version of Thomas Aquinas' great argument. Your oversimplified, not up to par version of Thomas Aquinas' argument.
A third thing, the God of the universe is an unmoved mover. No one created God. So that still leaves us a lot of work in figuring out, is the God of Christianity the God described by logic?
Yes, and the way you just said it makes him not. Because you have to use special pleading to have Jesus and the Holy Spirit interact with the universe. Also for God to be present in the universe and not just outside of it or around it. And how's he interacting if he's not actually in it? Like, you're making a dichotomy where there doesn't need to be one and where there shouldn't be one for Christian understanding, let alone Catholic understanding. Necessary paradoxes and mysteries are a much better explanation than this.
Is the God that we encounter in the Bible the one and the same God that we've reasoned our way to knowing the existence of? But we at least know this. The question, who created God, is an absurd argument. It does not understand. It's like saying, what car pulls the engine car? Or saying, under what conditions will an unconditional thing happen?
Again, your what and who are wrong with the wrong emphasis on the wrong possesses. Okay. Who is pulling the engine? Who is pulling the train? Becomes what's pulling the train. Becomes how is it pulling the train. Becomes why is it pulling the train. The why is the goal. You want to get to the why. You can't be stuck in the who and the what. If you're stuck with the who and the what, and you never get to the how, and you never get to the why, you're never asking the deeper questions, or the more important questions. Because the train can be a metaphorical train, and the engine can be a metaphorical engine, and you become too literalist and too bound to your argument to where the absurdities of the argument then destroy your argument. Okay. I like Joe Heschmeyer. He's my favorite Catholic apologist currently. My top 3 Catholic apologists currently are Trent Horn, Jimmy Akin, and Joe Heschmeyer. Jimmy Akin slowly taking back the top spot. He had a terrible debate performance against Bart Ehrman, and that really hurt my opinion of him. But since then, he has really worked on his game. His last 2 debates were, I should say his last 3 debates were amazing. He kicked it out of the park. He went places I didn't expect him to go on a public stage. It's stuff I've heard him say on his personal channel. I never heard him say it on CWTN. I never heard him say it on Catholic Answers. But he put it out on a national debate, and he kicked ass with it. So Jimmy Akin's slowly moving back to my top favorite Catholic apologist. My current favorite apologist is still Gavin Ortlund, although he has been messing up more and more lately. But I think that's just inevitable with apologetics, where you can't be knowledgeable about everything, and eventually you're going to get to an argument where you have to use someone else's argument, and you're either going to mess up their argument or you're going to oversimplify the argument. You know what I mean? Like, San Souza is so good with on the Pope, but when he talks about anything other than the Pope, he just sounds lost. You know, that kind of thing. Anyway, I want to give a special shout out to Joey. Sorry. I want to give a special shout out to Adrian Bali. Thank you for coming onto the show. You're reaching the show at the very end. If you'd like to pay your donation, please pass around the plate. B.S. Lewis will be around in a little bit with the basket. It's a minimum of teeth. So thank you so much, Mr. Bali. I appreciate you coming onto my channel. For everybody else, Thomas, thank you again for coming on. Thank you for saving me from my rambling. B.S., it's great seeing you. Let's see. Oh, Joe Heschmeyer is the most likable. I really like his approach. I hate that when I dig deep on his stuff doesn't hold up. So Jimmy Akin, it doesn't matter how crazy what he says sounds. I can go 7, sometimes even 10 references deep, 10 sources deep, and what he's saying ends up still being correct, or at least his interpretation fits within the implications of the original source. With Joe Heschmeyer, you'll get 2 or 3 sources. You'll get 1 or 2 sources that match up to what he's saying, and then you get to the third. So the source for the second source will end up being either wrong, nonsensical, or have been debunked. So his first source that he goes to, or the first source that you get, agrees with him 100%. And then you go to whatever source that one was using, you'll get agreement for the most part. And then you go to the source that one's based on, and you usually find that what Joe Heschmeyer is saying is not what the original guy intended, which is too bad, because Joe Heschmeyer's arguments are beautiful and great. I just feel that he's incomplete in his research. Jimmy Akin, on the other hand, will say radically insane things, and he tests what he says. If you watch his channel and you read his blog, you'll see that he tests them, and he tests them against audiences, and he does do these tiny micro adjustments that you couldn't even notice he was doing, but he eventually gets his argument solid. But the amount of references and depth to his answers is amazing. It isn't just one source that he goes to, and it isn't just an encyclopedia or a dictionary. He spends his time, I don't know doing what at home, because he's also into comic books and dance calling and a few other different, like he has some major weird hobbies. And he still has time to do intense major research on the smallest minute detail of his of his knowledge base that he's going to share, of his opinion. So Jimmy Akin's amazing. He really is. I still want to know if he has a doctorate or not. I don't know if he does. All right. Anyway, once again, Thomas, Adrian, BS. Was there anyone else in the room that I need to? I think that's it. Have a great night. I love you all. Don't forget my message that I like to say whenever I think about it. God forgives you. God loves you. Please forgive yourself. Please forgive everyone. God's already forgiven you. So forgive everyone else and forgive yourself. I love you. Good night. Have a great day. Now change your ways and follow him. Here comes the music.
Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't stop me, you can't stop me now. Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't lock me, you can't lock me down. I will not lay down my arms, ready to be covered in scars. Cause I will always be a warrior. Late nights, get lost, hard work, the cost. Can't quit, can't stop, this world all cut off. Don't have time to waste, not now. Need to find a way to get out. Cause I'm gone in deep, get lost in the weeds. You know it's all about the conquest, what's next? You gotta put the work in like you're obsessed. Think about what you want, what's your future? What kind of person would it take to seduce her? So what's